have a chat together. I have the question already prepared, and we'll go as we will talk, and we'll invite people to make sure their mics are off. And Julie will be facilitating the chat box.
All
So
right.
I would like for everyone to present themselves first of all, saying who they are, either teachers, principals, and where you're from. So you'll be able to see we have beautiful people from around Canada. And
Terrific.
as the discussion goes on, make sure to write your question. So we'll come back to it, see if we haven't answered those questions that you had.
Good.
And so, first of all, I would like to wish you a really, really warm welcome. I'm very nervous. It's the first time I'm doing this. Um, so I'll let you know right away. You know, my English, my first language is French, so that's why I'm a little bit hesitant sometimes. But I think you'll understand me. Nihal usually understand me, so you'll probably be able to understand me.
I'm
Um, yes, we are very pleased because, as you know, we've been reading your book for the past month. So every Friday we meet and we're discussing your beautiful chapters, and we're reflecting on everything you've been saying and writing, and it's been amazing. Our thoughts are going very further down. We have COVID right now, but we're talking about stuff in September, how when we'll be going back to school. So that's one of the things that I wanted you to let know, that we are mostly teachers in a public setting. So as you know, we have our beautiful report cards to write and our beautiful curriculum to check check different contents and stuff like that. I know we have principals with us also, and we have also, I think we call them caretakers when you're in daycares. So we have younger people, and we also have people from forest school. So we have facilitators that do forest school in the meeting right now. So this will give you a little bit of a context of who we are and where we're coming from. So I know we have people from Manitoba, Yellowknife, which is very, very high, very cold. It's getting warmer. We have people from Quebec, and we have people from Ontario. So let me introduce you, Mr. Gray. So Mr. Gray is a researcher professor of psychology at Boston College. He has conducted and published research in, neuroendocrinology, developmental psychology, anthropology, and education. He's the author of books, of a textbook, and also a blog that we'll be sharing in the chat, so you could refer them later on. As you know, he's the author of the book we've been reading. It's free to learn. And I think we could say that you're an influencer in the learn-centered education, and he's an expert in self-directed education. So I see that you're a very, very busy man, and I'm just curious to start like this, our conversation, and asking you, what do you do in your free time? Do you play?
Yes, I do. I every day I'm outdoors for at least an hour, usually more like 2 or 3 hours, and my play includes kayaking and bicycling and gardening, and in the winter cross-country skiing and skating on the pond. A lot of things that I've done pretty much all of my life, I still continue to do, and so that's all very important to me. I also play in other ways too, and I like to think that my work, especially since I've retired from teaching, so I don't have any immediate obligations, that my work is play in the sense that every morning I get up and I say, I don't really have to do what I'm doing today. I must be doing it because I want to do it. And at least in that sense, it's play.
Exactly. So we'll start with the book. In the chapter 3, you say why schools are what they are, a brief history of education. I know some of the people with us haven't read the book, so can you give us a little bit of pointers or just a brief overview of the history of education, so we could give us context to the people who haven't read it?
Yes. So I, I, in that chapter, I'm trying to understand and explain why schools are structured the way they are. Um, you know, I think that people, I hope, I know I'm speaking to teachers here and principals, and I hope I don't offend anybody. I have great respect for teachers and principals. My own sister was a teacher for many, many years. My mother was a teacher. My father-in-law was a school principal, and so on. So I come from a long line of public school people. But as you know, if you've read my book and you've read my other work, I am not a fan of the way we organize school. I'm a fan of people who are trying to do their best within the way we organize school, but I'm not a fan of the structure of school. And so what I'm trying to explain in that historical chapter is why schools are the way they are. You know, I think most people who go into teaching, they think that what they want to do is help foster a love of learning, creativity, critical thinking, um, you know, all of these kinds of things, social, emotional growth, all of these kinds of things. But if you think about it, if that were the purpose of school, school wouldn't be organized anything like the way it is now, because you can't foster those things if you have a system where everybody's supposed to be learning the same thing at the same time in the same way. So, my research and my focus is on how children are naturally designed to educate themselves. I'm absolutely convinced children come into the world born to educate themselves. And what are the drives that promote this education? Curiosity. Children are curious from the moment they're born. They're constantly curious. They're constantly exploring the world. That's how they learn about the world around them. They're playful. They want to play. And whereas curiosity is how you get information, how you acquire knowledge about the world around you, play is how you develop skills. And throughout the world, children, when they have lots of opportunity to play, play at all the kinds of activities that are important for them to become skilled at. Just like other mammals also play at the activities that are important for them to become skilled at. So curiosity and play and sociability. Children want to connect with other people. They want to know what other people know. They learn over, you know, anthropologists tell me that worldwide children learn more by overhearing and watching adults and older children and other people than in any other way. They're constantly, their eyes are open, their ears are open. They learn a lot more by overhearing what adults say than by being taught by adults. So I'm trying to understand why it is we have a school system that instead of fostering these natural drives to learn, suppresses them, suppresses every single one of them. Curiosity doesn't count in school. Your questions as the child don't count in school because you've got to follow the curriculum. If your questions counted, you couldn't work because there's 30 kids and they've all got different questions. There's no way you could manage a classroom that way, right? So curiosity absolutely has to be suppressed, no matter how wonderful the teacher is. It doesn't mean that it can't leak out a little bit, that there can't be some of it, but basically you cannot use curiosity as a fundamental drive for learning because you're not going to get everybody curious about the same thing at the same time. That just doesn't happen. And play, you know, if it exists at all in schools these days, it's recess, a break from learning. We don't consider it as the means of learning. So, and sociability is cheating, right? I mean, if you help somebody or you ask for help from another student, that's cheating. So we take these basic drives for education and we suppress them in school. And so then I ask the question, and now I'm finally getting to the history of schools. Well, why are schools organized this way? Shouldn't it be obvious that schools should play upon the natural ways that children are designed to learn rather than to suppress those ways? And so then I began to look, well, why are schools the way they are? What do we know about the history of schools? And so when I began to read about that, I realized, I discovered, for me it was a discovery, I'm sure others have known this for a long time, that the schools that we have today really originated during the Protestant Reformation. The roots of our schooling today originated during the Protestant Reformation. So this would have been, I'm always a little foggy on history, but this would have been about in the 17th century. Primarily, the nation that was ahead of everybody else in this was Prussia, the German state of Prussia. Had developed a system of Protestant schools that really is regarded as the predecessor to the schools we have today. If you were to walk into one of those schools, you would recognize it as a school. They had lessons that were timed. There were hourglasses that timed the lessons. They had a curriculum. The teacher was called the schoolmaster, was in the front of the room presenting information that the students were to feed back. And there was even teacher training. So a lot of what we think of as schooling was present. So now if you read the literature on those schools and what the people who designed the schools and who developed the schools and who trained the schoolmasters wrote, it's very clear that the schools were set up for three purposes. One of the purposes was for people who were coming from illiterate homes. It was important for the children to learn to read. And the reason it was important for the Protestants for children to learn how to read is because Protestants, unlike the Catholics, believed that everybody needs to read the Bible themselves. So the purpose for learning to read was to read the Bible. So, but even more important than reading the Bible was believing the Bible. So the second purpose was indoctrination, religious indoctrination. The way you indoctrinate is you continuously repeat something to somebody as truth, and you get them to memorize it and feed it back over and over and over again, and ultimately they begin to accept it as truth. So this method of teaching where we're presenting the information and the students are supposed to feed that information back, that was clearly part of indoctrination and religious training in those original schools. And then the third purpose, and at least some of the people who wrote about these schools said this was the most important purpose, is obedience training. The belief, of course, at that time among the early Protestants was that we are all born in sin. We're all sinful at birth. And basically, the sinfulness has to be beaten out of us. And that children need to give up their own free will because willfulness is the playground of the devil. And so the primary purpose, as described in some of the writings about these schools, the primary purpose was to suppress free will in the children and get them to obey the masters. Obedience was the primary purpose of education. Obedience to the schoolmaster, obedience to parents, obedience to the rulers of the territory you were in, the lords and so on, and ultimately obedience to God. This was the worldview at that time, was that education means obedience training. So now if you look at the schools in terms of, well, the original function was obedience training, the structure of schools suddenly makes a lot of sense, right?
Mhm.
Even today, what is the primary lesson we're teaching in school? The primary lesson we're teaching in school is obedience. Think about it. The only way you can fail in school is not to do what you're told to do. The only way you can pass is to do what you're told to do. None of it is very difficult. You can't fail as long as you do what you're told to do. You are learning to obey and you are learning not to question. Now, I don't want to say that teachers don't find ways to allow questioning and tolerate questioning, but most classrooms, if you got 30 kids in the class, no matter how enlightened you are as a teacher, you really at sometimes you just have to say, Look, I let's we can't spend time talking about why you have to learn this. You have to learn it. It's on the test. Because
Hmm.
I said so. You know, there's no way around it. You just can't do it. You would end up you would fail classroom management if you allowed students to be the way my son was when he was in school. He was unbearable in school because he questioned everything. He disagreed with the curriculum. He had the gall to disagree with the curriculum. He had the gall to say this isn't true. Something else is true. I want the evidence this is true. He was arguing this way when he was in first and second and third grade, and the teacher and he was so. I don't blame the teachers. They hated him. They needed him out of there.
Oh,
And that's when we found a different kind of education for him. But the point that I'm getting at is that the structure of our schools are a product of history. And the reason everybody agrees that schools don't work well, there's almost nobody who thinks schools work well. And this has been true for a long, long time. And the reason is because they're not designed to do what we modern, relatively progressive people think they should be doing. They're simply not designed to do that.
I agree totally, and that's one of the part when we were reading that chapter, we were like, oh wow, it explains so many things that we're doing that are we're questioning. So why do we ask the kids to remove their hats? Why do we do that? Is like, and I stopped doing it, but I was wondering where is it coming from? Why all those like our way of doing, where is it coming from? So that chapter helped me a lot to understand, and I have not the words to explain to parents sometimes if they're like, why don't you do that? I was like, well, it used to be like this and we're trying to get away from this. So my next question for you is, in Ontario right now we have a curriculum in the kindergarten. So that means 4, 5, and 6 years old. It's play based. So we want them playing. So that's the main thing. And it's working really well. Teachers, there's a teacher with another, I don't know how you say in English, it's a caretaker, I think you can say. So they're a team of 2 people and they work together and support play with the kids. But then I was a first grade teacher. They come in your classroom and our curriculum doesn't change. It doesn't tell us to do the play inquiry and the so can you give us maybe pointers or ways of how when we get those kids coming in because they have so beautiful knowledge, they have skills, they have competencies, how do you have things of how we could support them now in first grade, second grade, and as they grow older?
Yeah, so of course, my experience is more with schools in the United States, and tragically, in my opinion, even play-based learning is almost a thing of the past, even in kindergarten now in the United States. Kindergarten children are being given standardized tests, believe it or not. Kindergarten children are being sent notes home to their parents saying they're academically behind. What does it even mean to say a kindergarten children is academically behind? I hear from parents who are who are so overwhelmed. They feel like they must have a retarded child because the child isn't reading at 5 years old, and they're supposed to be starting. What used to be first grade is now kindergarten in the United States, and I know of kindergartens that have no recess in kindergarten. I mean, this is, in my mind, this is child abuse. So it should not, and there's no magic change when you go from kindergarten to first grade. You're not suddenly no longer need play. You're not suddenly all prepared to be sitting at desks and so on and so forth. I think what is now, I can't speak for Canadian schools, but I can talk about changes I've observed in American schools over my lifetime. So when I was a kid in school in the 1950s, in schools in Minnesota and Wisconsin, elementary school, teachers had a lot of authority in the classroom. So of course it depended therefore on the luck of the draw. Did you get a nice teacher or did you get a mean teacher? But I was lucky enough to have pretty good teachers for most of my elementary years, and they could use their own judgment. And teachers are generally loving people who care for children, and they can see what children need, and they will change what they're doing in the classroom at that time depending. So I don't remember the earlier grades so much, but I remember fifth and sixth grade well, where we had 6-hour school days, which is many schools still have that. Some schools in the U.S. are even longer than that now. But 2 of those hours were outdoors playing. I think I described this in the book. We had half-hour recess in the middle of the morning, half-hour recess in the middle of the afternoon, a full hour at lunch. So we had 2 hours of play out of our 6-hour school day. We were never indoors in our seats more than an hour at a time. And this was in fifth and sixth grade. I don't actually remember. I think it was very similar in the earlier grades, but I can't swear that I remember that. So, and when we were playing, I don't remember the teachers were even watching us. We were trusted to play in whatever ways we wanted. We had snowball fights, we climbed trees, we played with knives. We played all boys carried knives in those days. And we didn't throw them at each other, but we had all kinds of games that you played with knives. We did things that would never be allowed, at least in American schools today. So it was much more. We also have no homework. Now, over the years since that time, school has become increasingly driven by standardized testing, by a sense that everybody's supposed to be learning the same thing, no matter what their interests are, no matter what their dispositions are. They're supposed to be learning the same thing at the same time. And if they're not, it's the teacher's fault. And so teachers become responsible to make sure that everybody's learning the same stuff at the same time. That in this country, we call it No Child Left Behind. And then there's other programs that have followed that. And you're a failure as a teacher if you don't do that. And you're a failure as a school principal if you don't do that, or a school superintendent. And so the focus becomes for the self-preservation of the teachers, the principal, and the superintendent, the whole school, in order to get the government funding, becomes increasing those test scores. And the belief is, which I actually think is false, but the belief is that the more you drill the kids, the better they're going to do on those tests. And so for the sake of the test, you take away recess. For the sake of the test, you take away all the creative things you used to have, like writing poems and stories and decorating the classroom, the things that were kind of creative but not graded and judged. Those things you remove, and what is left is really the worst part of school, and the best part is taken away. So that's what's happening in the United States. And a consequence of that is, which I've documented in academic articles and I describe in my book, Free to Learn, although there's more documentation since I wrote that book, that a consequence of that is, as we have made schools more and more test focused, taken away the playful, creative activities in schools, children are becoming increasingly stressed. There is higher and higher levels of depression and anxiety, and at the tip of the iceberg, suicide. The suicide rate among school-age children in the United States is now 6 times what it was in the 1950s. The rate of suicide for school-age children is twice as high when school is in session as during vacations from school. Interestingly, we're doing a little study through the Let Grow organization that I'm part of, actually a fairly big study of how families are coping during the school closures now, and the children are doing better. The children are doing better. They're doing their lessons at home, but they can do the lessons at home in about a third the time of at school, and so they've got time to play. They've got time to do their own things, and the parents report they are less stressed, and the children themselves report that they are less stressed than when they are in school. So to me, this is a tragedy that we have a school system that is supposed to be something for the benefit of children, and it is driving children crazy. It is literally driving many children crazy. Something like 1/3 of children in school in the United States at some point in their school career have anxiety at the level that warrants a diagnosis of clinically significant anxiety disorder or depression, major depressive disorder. One third. That should not happen. And that never used to happen. That should not happen. This is not normal childhood to be so depressed and anxious, and suicide among children should never occur.
Mm,
And yet it is occurring. And we want to blame, in the US, we want to blame almost anything else. People blame video games, people blame social media, people, but if you ask kids, it's school.
wow, that's sad.
It's very sad.
Yeah. So that's you were talking about. We my Mihal and I was at the Let Grow when you were doing your conference yesterday. The webinar we listened and it was beautiful, and that's where we wanted to go to. It's like a segue to my next question. So in Quebec, the schools are open. Like Mihal is two girls go to school, and we're noticing that the teachers are going more outside and so maybe and we're seeing different things on media about the play, so maybe for to help teachers more understand what is real play, like a real session of play, maybe you could help us by giving us not a definition but different examples, because then we could maybe when we're doing our because in Ontario we're giving them an hour of work, but maybe knowing what is real play, maybe in our what we're suggesting the kids, we could maybe use what you're saying to facilitate where with those ideas.
Yeah, well, let me very briefly give a definition of play and then go to examples. So, because I think that I mean, play, of course, is like a lot of English words. It can mean a lot of different things. So, what play means to me and other people who study play as an activity is that it's a behavior, it's an activity that has these four characteristics. The first characteristic is that it's self-chosen and self-directed. That is crucial. That's self-chosen and self-directed. So right off, if a teacher stands up in front of a group of kids and says, now children, we're all going to play this, it's not play, right? And this is part of, even kindergarten children recognize that this is part of the definition. Somebody did a study of what it is that kindergarten children think of as play, and they showed them pictures of children doing different activities and asked, does this play or not play? The primary criterion they used is if there was an adult in the picture, they said it's not play because they assumed that the adult was controlling things. And play is something that you yourself are controlling, that you yourself has decided to do. Play is how children learn to take initiative. It's how children learn to solve their own problems. It's how children learn to follow rules but on their own initiative, create rules, to argue about rules, to negotiate rules, and so on and so forth. So if there's an adult there settling things for the kids and solving their problems, is not play. And the primary purpose of play, or at least one of the many primary purposes of play, is undermined when there's an adult there telling the kids what to do. And so one way that I illustrate this is the way that I used to play baseball as a child, until I got to high school and started playing high school baseball, was play. The kids would go to the vacant lot, and and there'd be a bunch of different kids there. There'd never be an adult there. The kids would be there. We would choose up teams. We would figure out the game. We would create the bases. We would create ground rules. There's a busy street there. Anybody hits it in that direction, automatic out. There's windows there. Anybody hits it towards those windows, also automatic out. You have to give handicaps to the really good players so they don't dominate too much. You have to really pitch softly to the other players. Think of all the things you're learning when you're doing that. You're learning things that are much more important than baseball. You're learning how to negotiate. You're learning how to solve problems. You're learning how to pay attention to whether your playmates are having fun or not, because if they're not, they're going to quit. Contrast that to Little League Baseball, where there's adult coaches, there's adult umpires, they're solving all the problems. And also now the goal becomes to win more so than to have fun, because winning suddenly becomes important as soon as you've got adults involved. So that's an example of the difference between play and non-play. A second characteristic of play is that it is intrinsically motivated. You're doing it because you want to do it. You're not doing it in order to get some reward outside of the play itself. You're not doing it for a gold star. You're not doing it for a trophy. You're not doing it for praise. You're not doing it for a grade. You're not doing it to improve your resume to get into college. You're just doing it because you want to do it. And in fact, one measure of whether something is really play is you're doing it even though other people don't want you to do it. Right. So that's so that's play. So play, you know how I assume this is true in Canada as well as the United States, that the typical graduation speaker says, follow your passions, follow your passions. What does it mean to follow your passions? It means to do what you love to do. How do you have any idea what you love to do if you've never had opportunity to play? Play is doing what you love to do. So one of the things that children discover in play, they play in a lot of different ways and they discover what they really love to do. And those who are lucky figure out a way to make a living doing that. And I actually, some of my research has traced people who've grown up with self-directed education. They have a lot of opportunity to play and and I find that people who've grown up that way, about 50% of them are in careers that are pretty much direct extensions of what they discovered as children that they love to do. And so their work is in some sense play. It's not totally play because they're being paid for it, but so that's a second characteristic. The third characteristic of play is that it always has rules. And the rules are not written down necessarily, and the rules are not formal rules. The rules can be restructured and argued about, and the rules, but in most games, most play, the rules are implicit. But play is always structured. It's structured by some guidelines of what it is you're doing, and those essentially are the rules of whatever it is you're doing. So if you're building a sandcastle, you're not just randomly piling up sand, you're building a castle. And if there's two kids doing it, they're constantly talking about what this castle looks like, what the rules of the play are. We've got to make a moat, we've got to make it higher, we've got to do this and that. Play is always structured, and it's always structured by the players themselves. No such thing as unstructured play. So and play is how children learn to structure activities. Play is how children learn to control their whims, because in play you can't just behave in a whimsical way. You have to follow the rules of your play. And the fourth characteristic of play is that it always, even though there are rules and structure, there's always lots of room for imagination and creativity. So play, I've argued, is the most creative of all activities. In play, children are exercising their creativity and they're exercising their imagination, because when you are playing, you're imagining yourself in a different world, and you're imagining, if this were true, then what else has to be true? You're exercising the highest order of human thinking, which is hypothetical reasoning. So think of little kids playing sort of a fantasy game, that one says, "Oh, there's a troll under the bridge," and points to the bridge they've created by putting two chairs together. And another says, "Oh, well, we better not go under the bridge." Well, that's hypothetical deductive reasoning, right? Okay, if we're imagining there's a troll under the bridge, if there's a troll under the bridge, better not go under the bridge. The famous developmental psychologist Jean Piaget many years ago argued that children are not capable of hypothetical deductive reasoning, and he was wrong. Anybody who's watched little children playing a fantasy game has seen them engage in hypothetical deductive reasoning in the context of play. So I hope I've kind of, in this whirlwind way, I've given you an idea of what play, the definition of play, and in defining it, explained at least some of the things that children are learning in play. They're learning how to initiate activities, control their own activities. They're learning they're learning what they love to do. They're learning, and they're becoming good at what they love to do. And they are develop and they are developing they're developing the ability to control themselves, because in play you have to control yourselves, and they're exercising their imagination and creativity and their hypothetical reasoning abilities.
Thank you. That could be like a little lesson to talk instead of talking to the kids, talk to the parents and tell them what is play so they could maybe support it when they're doing it at home with their
Yes,
kids. That's
yes.
beautiful. Thank you. So one of the another part of the book you're talking about Sudbury School, and in the reading circle we've been talking a lot about how all the little elements you're talking about the Sudbury School, how can we put it in a public school. So I know for us one of the main thing we were talking for my school is that we want the kids to talk, we want the kids to be involved with the rules, to be sharing if there's a problem how they can resolve it. So do you believe is it possible to take the values of the Sudbury School in a public setting? And if so, how can we do it?
Yeah, I think there are real limits to the degree that you can. And the reason is because in some sense, in some sense, I'm going to say things that you can do in the public school in a moment. I don't want to be too negative here. I'm going to be, because actually through Let Grow, we're working with public schools, and I think we're creating some improvements. But I don't think it's easy to translate Sudbury Valley into a public school. First of all, at least in the United States, you can't have a Sudbury school that is a public school because it simply doesn't
Mm,
satisfy the criteria for a school. So the things about Sudbury Valley is that it it the is sub I'm I talk about self-directed education, and self-directed education is destroyed if you're testing the children. And that's why you can't really translate it into a public setting, because I can't imagine a public school where you're not going to be testing the children. So as soon as you test the children, you've got a curriculum. As soon as you're testing the children, you are forcing, in some sense, the children to learn what they may or may not want to learn at the time that they want to learn it. So just to take in the sense, the most obvious example, at Sudbury Valley, everybody learns to read. There's never been a student who's gone through Sudbury Valley without learning to read. But they don't all learn to read at age 6 or 7. Some of them, as is true for children everywhere, some of them already know how to read by the time they're 4. Some of them learn to read when they're 5 or 6. Some of them learn to read when they're 7 or 8. The latest I know was somebody who learned to read when he was 14. He went on to major in philosophy in college. He reads really heavy books today. He's far more intellectual than I am. The fact that he was a late reader had no bearing on his ability to read later on in life. So at Sudbury Valley, nobody worries if a kid isn't reading. If they reach a certain point, they just have faith. By now they know everybody's going to. You grow up in a literary environment, you're going to learn to read. And their belief is that if you force a child to learn to read because you believe that child needs to learn to read at a certain time, that's going to have long-term negative consequences. That's going to make that child have a negative view of reading. One of the things I've observed about Sudbury Valley graduates, and I've also observed this there are many other schools modeled after Sudbury Valley now. There are also a whole brand of homeschooling called unschooling, which follows this model. What I have observed is people who grow up this way are big readers. I think they're much bigger readers than the typical college students I've taught at Boston College who've come from public schools, and they love reading. I can't say that for everybody, but on average, I think they are big readers. And I think part of it is they've never developed a negative attitude about reading. Another thing about them that I can say is that they don't suffer from math phobia. They're confident they can learn whatever math they need to know when they need to know it. In our teaching of math, the kids who aren't interested in it and are being forced through it and don't see the point of it, and in many cases there is no point of it, I could repeat that over and over again. Much of the math we teach, nobody ever uses. Nobody uses it. Even scientists don't use it. You know, and you can learn. And if you, for some reason, enter a walk of life where you need to know that math, you can learn it. So we are having harmful effects by testing children on certain things because that means we have to force them to do it. And so that's the first thing you have to give up, and you can't do that in a public school. The other thing you have to give up is age segregation. The
Mm.
Sudbury Valley would not work if the children were segregated by age, because the children are primarily learning from one another. The children are interacting, they're playing and exploring. And when children are playing and exploring across ages, which they do, it turns out little children are attracted to bigger children, and bigger children, believe it or not, are attracted to younger children. So even though there's enough kids there that they could self-segregate by age, they don't. They play across age, and the little kids are constantly learning from the bigger kids because the bigger kids are boosting them up into higher levels of activity. I've seen kids learn to read because they're playing video games with older kids who know how to read, and the older kids are pointing out the words to them. I've seen that over and over again. Little younger kids learning how to add up scores because they're playing games that involve adding up scores with older kids who are showing them how to do it, right? Or calculating baseball averages, how to divide, all of this is occurring in the context of play, as well as how to climb trees, how to throw a ball, all these kinds of things. And the older kids are benefiting from this as well because they are, number one, they are learning how to be caretakers. They're learning how to nurture. They're gaining a sense of their own maturity, how they can be helpful. They are also, whenever you explain something to somebody else, you consolidate that better in your own mind. So as they are teaching, not for the sake of teaching, but just for the sake of the game or whatever, or explaining something to a younger child, they are also developing a higher understanding of it than they otherwise would have. We all know that you learn more by teaching a subject than you do by being taught that subject, right? We've all had that experience. So that's another. And in addition to that, the younger kids, their energy, their optimism, their humor is inspiring to the older children. You see that especially when some kids come to the school as teenagers and they're kind of burned out and cynical and everything sucks, and so on and so forth in their view. And it's hard to hold that attitude when there's a bunch of little kids around wanting you to give them a piggyback ride, right? Or the little kids inspire the older kids with their energy and enthusiasm, and so there's so much benefit to age mixing. It's one of the worst things we do in school is segregate children by age, but because of the way our school is structured, we have to segregate schools by age. So I'm trying to give an example of why you can't transport Sudbury Valley into, but there are things you can do. And to me, they involve, in some sense, at least in the United States, steps backwards, back to the way we used to do school. More recess, more teachers' freedom in the classroom, because teachers get more less of the testing, less homework. There shouldn't be any homework in elementary school, and a lighthearted attitude, a playful attitude by the teachers, and fostering a playful attitude in the classroom. Um, I remember, and again in fifth and sixth grade, I remember the teacher, even though we were never in the classroom more than an hour at a time, sometimes she would see we were restless, and she would say, "Oh, I see you're restless. Get up and play." And she had hula hoops in the class. She had jacks, and there were things that we could just play with, take a little play break, and then come back. you Teachers, at least in the US, can't do that. They're not allowed to do that. The principal would stop them, and it's not the principal's fault necessarily, because the superintendent would stop the principal if the principal wasn't doing that. So that's the way. So what we're doing is at Let Grow, we're working with schools, and we're trying to create the kinds of changes that I've just talked. One of the things we've done and there are an increasing number of schools doing this, is introduce what the schools call play club. Anything that's not a class tends to be called a club in school, and so play club is an hour of free play, and it can occur before school. In some schools it occurs before school, in some schools after school. So far, I don't know any schools that have taken an hour out of the school day for it, although some of these same schools have increased recess. But during play club, All classes are combined. This is fifth through first kindergarten through fifth grade, elementary schools. All classes are combined. There will often be as many as 150 kids all playing together. The whole school is opened up for free play. The gymnasium, the art room, the outdoor playground, the hallways. Kids are, it looks wild, absolutely wild. The kids are running around in the hallways, they're tossing balls around, they're playing with, they're doing all kinds of, there's the only two rules during play club is you can't hurt anybody else and you can't and don't break anything. And believe it or not, the kids are following those rules, and the teachers are amazed that they don't have to discipline the kids. I've told them play is time for children to solve their own problems, and so the teachers should hold back who are observing. There's a requirement, a legal requirement, that there be a certain number of observers, and for some reason, I guess there's a teachers union requirement that the observers have to be teachers. But I've instructed the principals to instruct the teachers that while the teachers are observing this, they're not teachers. They're like lifeguards on a beach. They're there to save a life if somebody's going to die. That's putting it a little extreme. They're not there to intervene because there's a little squabble. Not there to go running and picking somebody up because they scraped their knee. Not there not there because some child looks sad and unhappy and they feel it's their job to go and cheer that child up. Play is the time for children to figure out how to solve their own problems. And what the teachers are discovering is that the kids are very good at it. And especially in this age mix situation, because an older child will come over and break up the fight between a couple of younger children, and that's much more effective than if a teacher does. An older child happens to notice that this little child is really looking sad and lonely, and the older child will come over and start playing tag with the younger child, and pretty soon they're both giggling and laughing. And so it's this is something that I would love to see schools open up every day for free play for that whole period of time when school day ends and parents are home from work. That would solve the babysitting problem and would add 2 or 3 hours of free age mixed play to everybody's life at school, which would come close to what children need. It's not really fully what they need. They need more than that.
Yeah,
But it
but it's
would
a
be a
point.
heck of a lot better than what they're getting now.
Yeah, it's the starting point, and I just love. I know we sometimes call it beautiful chaos because, like in
Yeah.
schools, if the students are quiet, then you're doing a good job. But for me, for the past 7 years, I've been like saying, no, if they're quiet, there's a problem. They should be talking. They should be having discussion. I'm not the only one who should be talking. So this club would be probably a good way of starting the play in the schools and finding a period. So that's nice. I like that.
I think that's a good point. So one of the things the principals have told me is that they have observed that the teachers, because the teachers have observed the children in play, have developed a better attitude towards the kids. And they are more trusting of the kids, and the teachers have become more playful in the classroom as a result of that. Less serious, less worried that there's going to be chaos if they allow kids to talk, if they allow, they're, and the kids have developed a much better attitude about school, and they now feel like they've got real friends. Even in other classes, they feel more part of the school than they did before. And this is an economically mixed school, and there's some evidence that the ones who may be benefiting the most are the ones from poorer families, because they're often the ones who feel the most alienated in school. And this is where, on the playground, of course, they shine, and they're making friends, and they're feeling much more part of the school. And the teachers are seeing, hey, this kid who doesn't seem to be very good at reading, wow, this kid is really smart out here on the playground. And it's not that this kid is stupid. It's and so I think that it's having, beyond just the beneficial effect of the play itself, it's having a beneficial effect on the spirit of the whole school.
Yeah. And one of our participants just added, we might even want to add the parents in that process. So if there's parents also observing kids playing, then they'll understand why we want to do it, and they'll have like examples. So that would be even better, I would say, like having adults being part of that play session would be
Right.
great.
As long as you could convince them, just like the teachers, that they're there not
Yeah,
to tell their child what to do.
yeah, to
They're there
observe
just to
and
watch and
yeah,
be,
yeah.
and also try to be, the downside of that is the child of the parent who's there is going to feel kind of self-conscious with the parent there watching. But on the other hand, I agree with your point. One of the things that we've learned is even those parents who were skeptical about Play Club are now raving about it on their Facebook pages. It's one of the reasons other schools are hearing about it, and other schools are asking to have Play Club there. I might also, with regard to parents' observations about their children, that one of the things we're learning from this study of families during the coronavirus closure of schools, and of course it's also the closure of all those after school activities that children were being carted around to. So kids are home and kids are bored, and kids are as a result of boredom. What do you do when you're bored? You figure out something to do to overcome the boredom. Boredom is a good thing. It stirs the soul. It gets you motivated. It gets you, for the first time, they've had the time and opportunity to become bored. And that means that they're also figuring out things to do. They're picking up one mom said that she saw her kid pick up the guitar that he's owned for years and never played it before, and suddenly he's playing it and getting interested in it. There are people talking about their kids wanting to cook dinner, wanting to do the laundry, and because this is also part of growing up. Kids want to do these things. They really do. We think they don't want to do these things, but when they have time and we allow them to do it and we're not too fussy about their doing it perfectly, they kind of want to do it. And they're also there are record numbers. Bicycle stores are selling out. Everybody's learning how to ride a bicycle. Kids who didn't have time to learn, parents who didn't have time to teach their kid how to ride a bicycle. I'm a big bicyclist, and I go out bicycling every day, and I have never seen so many kids out riding bicycles as I am now. And I have never seen so many parents out teaching their children how to ride bicycles. In one ride, I saw three such instances just in a 1 hour ride. So parents are right now developing a better understanding than they had before. So the same parents that in the past, is the typical day goes like this. You have to drag the kid out of bed at 6:30 in the morning so that you can get them breakfast, so you can get them on the school bus so they can get to school. And then after school, they've got some kind of after school club or activity. And then when they're finally home, they've got homework to do, or they've got some class to go to, some karate class or some darn thing to go to. And so the parent's job is more or less getting the kid from one thing to another, and they have little opportunity to see the child actually playing and doing anything. And the child has little opportunity to actually play because the child is always in adult directed activities. So what we're hearing is that the parents are developing a greater appreciation of their children's ability to take initiative and their children's ability to do things on their own.
It's beautiful, eh? It's so interesting because that was what that was my next question for you. So you just answered it. My question was, what lesson do you hope will come out of COVID? There's people who are living hard situation that we want to recognize. It's hard for certain
Yes.
families, but there's probably positive things that will come out of it. And you just said them, like kids will be bored and they'll want to play, and the parents will see them and have the chance to observe this beautiful process.
I think both kids and parents are going to say, well, does the kid really need to be in all of these after school activities? Wouldn't it be better to just have some time just to play my guitar on my own without lessons, or to go bicycle riding, or to enjoy the spring sunshine and lie in the
Mhm.
grass and watch the grasshoppers, the things that kids are designed to do. This, as I said it at one point, that the subjects of poetry, the stop and smell the roses, we've been depriving our children of this. We've been depriving them of the very things that our poets tell us are the most important things in life,
Yeah.
which come from having time on your own without demands being made on you. we've put a lot of demands on adults and we're treating children in the same way. Too many demands on them and not enough time for them to just be children.
That
So
it's
I think that there will be changes. I think, and I'm hoping that the schools learn a lesson from this, and either through the parents, that parents begin to pressure the schools to have more recess, to do less of the testing, to be more playful in school, to bring back some of those creative activities in school. I'm hoping that that happens, and I also think that the schools themselves may be learning from this. That, hey, I think one thing that's going to happen is that people are going to realize school can be closed for half a year and the kids aren't really behind.
yeah,
People talk about the summer slide from school being closed. I've looked up the research on that. There's basically no such thing as a summer slide, no real documentation of it. There's a little bit of a slide in arithmetic calculation and being able to do arithmetic the way it's done in school, but the data show that there is actually an increase in mathematical reasoning over the summer. And I think that's because children are doing things that involve real numbers in the real world when they're away from school. So I think that people are going to realize, in terms of real education, let's loosen up a little bit. We don't need to be spending all this time doing things. It's not benefiting the children. They're not learning more because they're spending more time at it. What we're doing is we're burning kids out. And we're burning them out earlier and earlier at younger and younger ages. I'm hearing from kindergarten teachers saying that kindergarten kids are already being burned out.
wow.
And so this I think that this pandemic will begin to put things in context. We've gone berserk in our belief in the importance of so much schooling and the important another thing that's part of it in the US, and I imagine the same as maybe not quite to the same degree in Canada, but parents are obsessed with getting their kids into an elite college. And they believe that to get into the elite college, they have to get all A's, they have to get into all the honors classes, they have to do all the right extracurricular activities, and that puts a lot of pressure on the
Mm.
kids. The truth of the matter is, in the United States, and I bet the same is true in Canada, anybody can go to college. And there's no big advantage in going to a more elite college than to a less elite college. I've published blog posts on it summarizing the actual research on this. There are economists and mathematicians who've combined to do research on other things being equal. Does it matter if you go to an Ivy League college or a fancy college versus the local state college and it turns out when you control for other factors, it doesn't matter. So
Wow.
all this pressure to get kids into it's like our we're almost using this in as a measure of the children themselves and a measure of the parents. If your kid goes on to an Ivy League school, that's a boasting point for you, right? And so we've got to get over this.
Of course. Yeah, I just, have you seen the time? It's already over. It's
Uh-huh.
so fun listening to you. Like I could do another one like this if ever you have the time. We would probably, a lot of people would join and listen to you. It's amazing. You're very helping us at focusing and trying to prioritize our what we should be doing in school. So I'm very happy for that. I just want to say something because I was saying caretaker and I think I was nervous. So they're called the teachers, the supporters in the daycare, the system. There's the teacher and the early childhood educator. So they're always together in a classroom. So there's always two adults.
Uh-huh.
Um, I was wondering, Julie, if do we have any questions that was not addressed for Mr. Gray?
Um, I think maybe one short question that wasn't addressed is that people are wondering, what has your son gone on to do? So you've mentioned that he has been educated in a different way. So could you maybe
Right.
give us a bit of an update on that?
Yeah, so he was a student long ago at the Sudbury Valley School, and it was actually when he started at that school that I began doing research in this area because I was worried. I was worried about whether he was going to. I knew he was happy in school with a school that doesn't do tests, and you can follow your own interests and so on and so forth. But I was concerned about whether he would have a successful adulthood. And so I ended up doing a study of the graduates of the school at that time, and I found the graduates were doing very well in life, and that's what led me to sort of change the orientation of my research. But meanwhile, he did go on to college, partly because he could go free to Boston College where I teach. He thinks it was a waste of time. He thinks if he had it to do over again, he wouldn't do college, that it interfered with his education rather than promoted it. He thinks he went for the wrong reason. He thinks he went just to prove once again, even though it hadn't been proven by many others, that you can go through Sudbury Valley School and get into college and do well in college. So that was kind of why he went, and he, in retrospect, thinks it was a mistake. He subsequently, for a few years, he was had a very actually a high paying job as a computer technician for a large furniture chain running their computers. He was always good in computers, but he never was very interested in computers. So for some reason, he had gotten good at it and he could make money doing it. But as soon as the job opened up as a staff member at the Sudbury Valley School, he applied for it. And he's been there ever since. And so I'm pretty sure he'll be there the rest of his life as long as he gets reelected to staff, because at this school, there's no such thing as tenure. There's only 1 year contracts, and you have to be revoted onto staff every year by a vote that includes the students and the staff members combined. So there's no staff members at that school who don't get at least a majority vote from the whole school community. So far, he's passed that for the many years he's been there. So
That's a beautiful story. That's great. I think to respect the time and respect your time, and probably you want to go back to play, either biking or enjoying something else. So I'll say thank you very much appreciated. We'll share the information to the participant if they want to read your book or read your blog. Um, I don't know if you want to say a last word for us.
no, except just thank you for tuning in here, and I wish we did have more time to talk and get to know one another. And my blessings to you all.
Thank you. I just might want to add that you're giving me the most beautiful gift for my birthday.
Oh, it's your birthday today! Yay! Yeah,
Everyone's been asking what gift I want, and I said I already have my gift. I'm going to talk to Peter Gray. So thank you so much for being with us, and wish you well. And thank you again.
thank you for inviting me. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
And thank you very much for Chantal for organizing this. Merci Chantal.
You're welcome. Bye bye. Merci beaucoup. Au plaisir.
Moi, je veux juste rester pour continuer.
Moi, je dois quitter malheureusement. Donc...
Ah oui, c'est bon. Merci. Bonne fête.
On se reparle bientôt. Au revoir.
À bientôt.
Bye, bonne fin de semaine.
À vous autres aussi.